Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Hammer Time Rackets podcast. I believe the last time we did this was in May of 2021 during COVID. We're out of COVID now, and we're back with former world champion James Stout. Welcome, James.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good to be having you. Good to be seeing you. So before we start, I think just like to say that as a current student and partner of yours, very grateful for everything you've done for me as a player and as a mentee. I'm extremely lucky to have access to you as a coach and a mentor, and it's been a fantastic experience for me. So if I forgot to say that at the end, it's been said. So we're going to get started. And the first question for you, we're going to go all the way back to your days at Cheltenham. Do you remember the first time that you stepped on court, and who was that person that you hit with, and what's your first memory of rackets?
So first memory of rackets was not actually playing rackets. My older brother, Michael, was a couple of years older than me, but he was 1 year above me at Cheltenham. And I remember he'd come back after his first semester at Cheltenham, and he was raving about this game that he was playing called Rackets. And I remember being so jealous. I was like, oh my God, what is this? It's like this fast version of squash. So when I went over, followed in his footsteps, went to Cheltenham, and I remember I was just so excited to walk onto the Rackets court to play for the first time. And I remember first time I went out there, was playing with the guy in my brother's year group, James Hayes, who was probably number 2 in the country at the time. And we're knocking up, and when I say knocking up, I'm miss hitting every single ball. And I just remember the balls come down the middle of the court. I was on the backhand side, and I've turned, and I've basically caught outside top edge of my frame, and I've hit the ball into his throat. And I just remember being like, oh my God, what have I done? And it gave me a healthy dose of just how dangerous this game was, right?
Yeah.
From the first time I stepped on court, it was sort of oh wow, I've just hit a guy, thinking this isn't a difficult shot.
Yeah. Did you wear glasses from the get-go just as a squash player? Did you no?
So I was my generation, goggles weren't required for squash. They weren't required for rackets. So I never grew up playing. It wasn't until I started at the racket club that I started wearing them. Yeah.
So at Cheltenham, you obviously played squash, you played racket. You didn't play any other sports besides squash and rackets, or did you do anything else?
I did. I played I played cricket, played field hockey, tennis,
Okay.
but
And
not.
what was the sort of the breakdown between your squash and your rackets, and how was that sort of routine for you during the season?
It was interesting because I went to Cheltenham to actually get more exposure for squash. So I went over. We actually had a pretty strong group of squash players. Our number one when I first got to Cheltenham was, I think, Malaysian number 2, phenomenal international player. Graham Tyndall was, top 5. Alex Caldecott, who was in my year, he was a former top 10 in England, under 13. So the level of squash was pretty high, and so basically ended up playing a lot of squash. Basically played squash and rackets every single day. But it was sort of squash was a bit of a chore, and rackets was okay, I've played squash, now it's time to go to the rackets court and have some fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
And obviously the main man in Cheltenham is Mark Briers, who I think is universally beloved in the game of rackets, and has a really good reputation as a coach and mentor. What
That's
about
only,
him?
that's only because the people that don't like him, he's kicked them out of the game.
Good point. Good point. You know, what did Mark do for you, and what about him do you think makes him such a good coach? And what about him has allowed so many of the players from Cheltenham to go on to do great things in the game?
Mark's a terrible rackets player. Like, it's the only way to describe his actual like on-court skills. Very good cricketer. So like very good understanding of like spins, bounces. Very good athlete. He basically, I think his biggest strength was the environment that he created around the rackets court. It's hard to picture, unless you've actually been there. You've got like the cricket pitch is right outside of the court. You walk in, you've got the hallway to the rackets court. There's a little door that goes into his office. His office is, it's smaller than a New York City studio, right? Which is saying something. But we would have 20 kids packed in, sitting on the couch, sitting on the floor, drinking tea, drinking coffee, eating his biscuits, watching football, rugby, cricket, whatever it was. Like he basically did a fantastic job of bringing people together and making this sport, this group, like really a fun sort of group to be a part of. And so, it was a lot of the better athletes, at the school. And I'm not just saying that to big myself up. It was more sort of like, when I first started, the joke was, squash players aren't very good rackets players because they're too wristy, they're not used to the speed. So a lot of pros would look at the top cricketers, right, where you're sort of playing that ball along the line that it's coming. Like a good cricket batsman, right? Like that's your ideal rackets player. At least it was. So it was just like, it was a cool environment to be in. You're around cool guys, playing this really fun sport. Like he just, he did a phenomenal job of getting the guys in that would continue to bring in other people as well year after year.
Yeah.
Right. So like, when I was in the third form, right, like my first year, like the guys in the upper six in their final year, they were the top athletes in the school, and so every single year it sort of just built upon itself, where it was like, I want to be a part of this. And then like to actually talk about his coaching, like I said, he's not a very good player, but he is probably the best coach at coaching the fundamentals. Just, turn your shoulder, don't be lazy, move your feet, turn your shoulders, keep moving, turn your shoulders, keep moving, right? It's like, you don't need to do anything more than that, definitely through school, right?
Yeah.
The school game, to actually become like a pretty decent rackets player.
Yeah. So moving on from Cheltenham, you graduate Cheltenham, and I think we talked about this. You knew that you wanted to become, at least at the time, a single squash pro. You go to Antwerp, right?
Yeah.
What was the plan there? Because obviously that plan, you went off on a tangent from that plan at one point or another. So it'd be interesting to hear sort of how things evolved from you leaving Cheltenham and then you winding up at the Rack Club. Like what was that period of time like for you?
So first time I ever went to the Racket Club was I was 15. It was on Rackets tour. We came over to North America. and one of the stops was New York, and I remember just being absolutely blown away by the club. Just could not imagine that I was in a place like that. The locker room is sort of otherworldly, the court itself, like it's the best gallery. It's just the atmosphere, everything about it, right? You're middle of New York City. So I told Briars, like, whilst we were in New York, I was like, I'm gonna work here one day. Like this is what I want to do. And so when I graduated Cheltenham, I was sort of like, I want to give squash a proper go.
Yeah.
Rackets, I don't need to be in my 20s to become a fantastic rackets player. I can do it later on in life. And when I say later on, I mean, 30s, mid 30s, right? Which is
Yeah.
normally sort of when squash careers are on the decline. And so I was like, I want to give squash a really good go. I knew that rackets would always sort of be there. And so it was, I moved to Belgium. I played on the professional tour for like 4.5 years. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. Learned a lot from it. And I think like in that 4.5 years, I think I played rackets like twice. Once was coming back to play the Cheltenham Gold Racket, which is a fun like old boy tournament.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I came back and I played with Ryan Tully, and we ended up like winning the entire thing, which was pretty fun. And then the other time was actually like when I applied for the job in New York. But besides that, it was sort of squash was, to play professional squash, it's, you're living and breathing the game, right?
Yeah.
You're training every day, you're watching what you eat, like your lifestyle. And so it wasn't sort of like, oh, I'm going to play rackets and play squash at the same time. It was one or the other. And I sort of was like, I'm going to give it the best go that I can.
And then you obviously didn't keep up the eating well and being a good boy for quite some time. I don't know if the diet's changed since the last time we ate together, but as far as I know, you still eat like a 10-year-old child.
Being generous. That's
Yeah.
being generous.
So you make the decision to make the switch back to rackets and come to the US. Walk me through what that process was like, moving to a whole nother continent, and starting up at the Rack Club, and what was that job like, and what was your first impression of working there?
So like towards the end of my time in Belgium, I had like a little falling out with my coach at the time. Just didn't quite see eye to eye on everything. And so I was sort of in between. I was in between coaches. I was still competing. I was still doing some squash coaching on the side. And Briars actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, like the New York Racket Club is looking for a pro. Would you be interested?" And I was sort of like, "Yeah, I always knew I wanted to work here, so it was definitely sort of." It was definitely like came up on my radar, and the timing worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
I was early 20s, which again, like I'd been playing squash for 4.5 years professionally. I personally don't think I'd reached like my highest point, but it was sort of, you tend to have an idea of like roughly where you could get in the world. Like what sort of grouping are you, if you're going to be world number one, if you can get to like top 20 in the world, top 50 maybe. And so I sort of had an idea of where I could possibly get, with like a lot of work, a lot of effort, more sacrifices. And so I was like, you know what, like, let's try New York. So I ended up coming over to New York. got on court with Mike Gooding, who was the head professional at the time. We played squash, court tennis, and rackets. I was being hired as basically a court tennis assistant as well as, you know, a rackets assistant. We went on court, and he was.
Was that the first time you played court tennis, by the way?
No, I played. All schoolboys tend to play at Queens during the school tournament.
Right.
So I had played court tennis. I knew about the game. I somewhat knew the rules, but I hadn't, like, no one had ever said like, "Oh, this is what you should be doing technically."
Yeah.
So you know, Mike and I are on the rackets court. He quickly goes like 14-2 up on me, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this is not a good interview, right? Like, I need to come back. I need to beat him here. Otherwise he's going to be like, you know, why should I hire this joker as a rackets pro?
Yeah.
Ended up coming back, ended up beating him 15-14. Was fortunate enough that he actually like decided to give me the job. So that was sort of that was like the summer of 2006. And then so I started work just after Labor Day, September 2006. And I remember like no one had told me anything about the club. You know, I just remember like, you know, the front doors on Park Avenue. I didn't know there was an employee entrance. So I've shown up like jacket, tie. I've got like a little squash bag with a racket, some weights, some shoes. You know, I walk into the front door, and I'm like, oh, you know, my first day working here. You know, they're sort of like, okay, well, like,
get in the back.
why have you used the front door?
Yeah.
So I go up to the pro shop. Ben Gould's sitting in there, and I introduce myself to him, and he's like, oh, so you know, are you a new member? And I'm like, no, I'm the new court tennis and rackets pro. He's like, well, you know, why do you look like a dickhead? You know, and that sort of, you know, I felt pretty comfortable thereafter. Like, you know, the guys are warm, welcoming, and I like straight away knew that I was in a great spot. Like I had great group of pros to sort of learn from, to hang around with, and you know, it's New York City. Like, it's a pretty fun place to be when you're sort of 22 years old.
Yeah. So at that time, obviously Neil was one of the pros. Mike was a pro. Jonathan had just left, I think he said, as a member.
He left shortly after I arrived at the club.
Mm-hmm. And we had spoken about sort of the period between when you started and when you had your first World Championship challenge. And I think Neil had mentioned that there was a period of time where you didn't play, or maybe a season or two where you didn't play any tournaments at all, for one reason or another. Can you shed some light on what the reasoning behind that was, and what was sort of going through your mind as a player as you were starting to build up the James Stout that we all came to know and love as a player?
So when I took the job in New York, I was seeing a Belgian girl at the time, and you know, my plan was actually to just come over for 2 years. 2 years, make some money, and then actually move back to Antwerp. And I had said to myself, you know, like, I wanted to become rackets world champion, so I gave myself, you know, 2 years to do it. And I knew that for that to become a reality, I couldn't afford to lose any bad matches. So I came over knowing that for the first year that I was here, I wasn't going to play a rackets tournament. I wanted to get my level up to, you know, to a competitive degree, so that when I did end up challenging for the world championship, you know, there wasn't the, oh, well, James lost to, you know, like a young Peter Cipriano, or
You can't have that on your record.
There's only one. But so so I came over and I was like, look, I'm going to train. I've got Neil here, Mike, like pretty fortunate in New York, had like Thorold Barker, who was one of the better players at the time in North America, Guy Devereaux. So there were a lot of guys that I could get on court with. Neil, to this day, is probably the best rackets coach that I've ever had. His approach to the game was, his style of play was very similar to mine, sort of a retriever, like not all about power. So it was a bit more like ball placement. So that first year was just, get as good as I possibly could. And I was playing with Neil. I was playing like big handicap matches with Thorold Barker and Mike Gooding, trying to get, 5 serves to 1, 5 serves to 2, like that sort of thing, where it was like, okay, like just get every single ball back. Don't let them win a point. Make it tough. So I was playing court tennis. I was playing some squash still. So I would go and travel for those tournaments. I played like the World Open squash in my first year at the club. Played like US Open court tennis. Losing to Nicolas Victoire, right? Like it was sort of all a learning experience while I got up to the standard that I thought I needed to be to challenge for a world championship.
Very good. So the first tournament you played, must have been a US Open?
The first major tournament was US Open. I played the Western Open, which was actually in New York. I think that was like 2007. I beat James Coyne in the final, which was, a good result. And then the first major tournament was the US Open. And that I beat Neil Smith in the final, and then he and I won the doubles together.
And where was that?
That was in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't go over to England for the British Open that year, or you did?
Yeah. So won the US Open. Actually, I beat Tichenor Barrett in the semi-final, which I think was an upset because I think maybe he was seated higher than I was. I'm not sure. But went over to London, played in the British Open singles. Had a good run. I beat Mark Hubbard in the semis, and then Alex Tichenor Barrett actually had a big upset and beat the then world champion Harry Foster in the semis in 7 games. And then I played Alex in the final and beat him 4-1, and then put in a challenge at the end of the season, basically saying like, hey, I've won the US Open, British Open, I'd like to challenge for the world championship.
So you get a challenge, and I think we were talking about this the other day. It's probably one of the first times that the world champion and the challenger had never played each other before.
Yeah.
In your mind at that time, if you can remember, how are you preparing for a match when you've never played somebody, and at that time there's also not a tremendous amount of YouTube to watch or anything like that? What was the prep like for that, and what was that experience like in the lead up?
It was interesting. Like, again, I was very fortunate. Like, I had Neil around, and so even though I hadn't played Harry or really watched him that often, Neil's experience, like he knew him, he knew what his strengths were. We went into the match knowing that he was at the time the best server in the game. He could sort of rely on 5 to 6 aces every single game. And so, I knew that like the return of serve was going to be huge. Like I had to stop him from getting on big runs. I knew I had to sort of, I had to get him moving. I had to make him uncomfortable. Like, I'm not sure if you know this, but like his grip is absolutely
massive grip. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of when he was in position, he had this huge swing and he made such clean contact with the ball. But again, like if he's not in position, then he's getting jammed up, or if, he's sort of under pressure to get there. So I knew I sort of had to like just keep him off balance as much as I could. Didn't necessarily mean I had to hit perfect shots, like a little bit unorthodox into his body. When you have someone who can sort of adjust close, like that's the sort of, it's not a bad game plan to have. But I was looking forward to it. I was really excited. Like I said, I'd given myself this goal of, trying to become world champion in 2 years. And, I'd put myself into a good position. And so it was like training again, like at this point, it was just play as much rackets as I possibly could, as much time on court. And then the actual match itself, like I remember like the big changing point for me was actually, the first game we were tied at 12 all. And I think I'd just gotten the ball back up at the front of the court, and he was up there and he hit this kill shot and he smashed it into the tin. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, this is great. Like he's nervous, like he's nervous, and he's sort of like just given me an opportunity here, which I ended up taking, and like I won that game. And then that was sort of like a big sort of relief. It was like, okay, he's nervous, he's trying harder than what he probably wants to. So that was that first world championship.
It's funny, you remember moments, and I was there for you playing Alex. I can't remember much of the match in New York, and then obviously Hoppy and Tom, and you remember a couple moments in each of those matches where they're like the little turning points. And whether it's skill or luck or a combination of both, definitely in singles and doubles as well for you. But playing the big points and stepping up in those moments was always something that you were seemingly able to do almost like on call, like at any beck and call whenever you needed it.
You're sort of like looking for these little moments, right? Like, okay, because again, in every single one of those matches, right, it's a world championship. Anything can happen on the day, right? Like I'm playing against the number 2 in the world, there's no shortage of talent on the court, right? So a lot of it is these minute little sort of differences in play, in sort of like mental strength, right? And you're looking for that. And again, I've always been fortunate where it's like when I see that, it's like, go, like this is it. Like this is an opening that's just been created. Take it right now, and that's singles, doubles, right? It's Tom Billings, right? My last world championship in New York, I was 3-love up. He was looking really strong in the 4th game. Like I'd won the 3rd game 15-love. I came back on court, I'm taking my foot off of the gas a little bit. And he's got this opportunity to win the game, and it's a big moment, right? And he folds, he folds twice at game point, and it's it's like, okay, like again, here we go. This is the time where it counts,
And it was funny after you come off the court. I don't know if you remember this. We're sitting there, and you also said, "I got lucky there because I was cramping, or I was about to start cramping. I could feel it coming in my hands, and I think you said in your quad." So I don't know if you ever told Tom that, but opportunity lost there for him. Luckily for him, obviously things worked out and he became world champion in the future. But certainly would have been a tough way to go out and not get over the hump with that sort of hiding just beneath the surface. A couple of years later, obviously we had spoken about Alex Tichenor-Barrett as an opponent. Over probably that 2-year period, maybe a little bit longer, I think your reputation as a player was rallier, guy who gets everything back, amazing court coverage. And over like a 2 to 3, maybe 4-year period, you develop into what I think anyone would characterize as like the most complete player. The serve, you end up developing like a ridiculously good serve. excellent return and sort of round your game out. Was there anything in particular that you did to get that going, or was it sort of like a natural progression, having coached a lot and just spent more time on court?
So like my first world championship was definitely like I wasn't very I wasn't very disciplined with like balls coming off the back wall and opportunities to end the rally. I think, Howard Angus was watching the match and he kept track of how many aces there were, and it was like a frightening number. It
Yeah.
was maybe one or two in the entire match. And so, I had this like, okay, I'm relying on my legs, I'm relying on my fitness. Even then, like I cramped up when I was playing Foster, right? It's a very different court from squash. It's best of 7 games. It takes a lot out of you, a lot more than what you're used to, training, right? You're training
Yeah.
normally best of 5. So I had a big emphasis on like trying to sort of improve my serve, control the ball, put the ball where I wanted it to go. And I would say that like over those few years, like my time on court was all about learning. It was just like, why is the ball coming out to this spot? Where is that ball going to end up? And my ability to I had a couple regular members here in New York who I actually thought like played probably one of the most significant roles in my improvement over those first like 3 years. Was Elihu Inselbach and David Emil. Like they were the 2 regular guys that would play, 3-4 times a week. And with those guys, it was sort of like I could hit the ball as hard as I wanted at them, but I had to get it back to them, right? And so
Yeah.
you learn like, okay, from this position, I have to hit inside of the ball in this spot to get it, to within 5 feet of where their racket is. And that made a massive difference, Like I learned how to control the ball. I learned all the different spins. And that sort of allowed me to sort of really improve my serve. Like, okay, try to carry this serve deeper into the corner. If you can land it within 3 feet of the back wall, it's going to roll. Little things like that. I still had the retrievers mentality, but not quite in the same way. It was more sort of like return of serve. I did a lot of handicap matches. Like I said earlier, big handicaps, 5 serves to 1, 5 serves to 2, 6 serves to 2, where, I was playing matches and my opponents had, 70 serves, right, to try to win 15 points. And it was like, 6 serves in a row and you're not winning one of them.
Right.
So I got to a point where I felt really comfortable whether I was serving or returning, that I could always win, right? Unless you hit the perfect serve, like I was pretty confident that I could get the serve back and get you under pressure.
Yep.
That being said, there's Tichenor Barrett and James Coyne. Like for me, especially like earlier on, those 2 were like a different level when it came to attacking. They had the ability to just like blow anyone off the court.
Right.
And that's where I couldn't rely on just being a retriever against those guys. Like I actually had to put the ball away myself and put them under pressure. Otherwise, you give them enough opportunities, they're going to hit a winner.
Yeah. Which actually I think brings me to my next question. I had some rapid fire stuff. The first one was, who do you reckon was your toughest opponent in singles while you're still on the singles circuit?
Alex was always like a nightmare to play against. Still does. He has a fantastic serve. And his average ball speed that he hit the ball in the rallies was, 15 miles an hour faster than me,
Yep.
than anyone else. And so, he didn't quite have like the same sort of control, but when you've got that little time to actually get into position and get the ball back, it's so tough to play against. Whereas like Hoppy, like later on in my career, like Hoppy and Billings, they were both sort of a little bit more retrievers, runners. So I always sort of felt like I had, if I was patient, I could sort of scrap together a win,
It's also, I think, a similar skill set, right? Like, Tom, a little bit more similar to you than Hoppy, but they're good at their best qualities are also probably at the time, at least probably your best qualities. Which I think makes it a little bit harder for guys like that. If they can't rely on something else and that's their best thing, if they're not better than you at it, there's not a heck of a lot that you can do. That's interesting. So a couple more of the rapid fire type questions. These are going to be completely just picked out of the list here that I've got. What would you say, and we've talked about a few of these matches, the World Championships, the US Opens, what would you say is your proudest moment on a singles court rackets?
Like I'd say I've got a couple. Winning the World Championship was definitely like a highlight of my career, because I had set myself this goal. It's like I want to win the World Championship. Like that was I focused. That was really like that was really sort of like nice to see what could happen when I did put my mind to something. But I think like the big one that really stood out for me was probably like I won the Foster Cup 2 years in a row, and the second time I won it in my final year at Cheltenham. That was probably, and again, there's some serious like demons in my head and stuff from like Briars back in the day. But the reason why it stands out is for 5 years, like he just wouldn't compliment myself, Alex Caldicott, who, lost in the final 2 years in a row. Ben Snell, like he just wouldn't compliment us. We would play school matches, we would win, for love. And, we'd come off court and be like, hey, you happy? Like, we won. And he would always be like, no, you were lazy. Like you could have done this better. You could have done that better. And I remember like after winning the Foster the second time, he actually just congratulated me and said, well done,
Nice.
like, and that was, to me, that meant a lot. That was sort of like, not that I've been playing, 5 years hoping for that, but it was, that was like a special sort of like moment in my career.
We haven't talked anything about doubles, but you've famously partnered with legends such as myself, Jonathan Larkin, Mike Gooding, and Neil Smith. What would you say is your proudest moment as a doubles, half of a doubles pair or a doubles player?
I love doubles. Like it's so exciting. Different sort of challenges, like how well can you work together with the guy you're on court with. For me, each of those four guys, yourself, Jonathan, Neil, and Mike, every moment stands out. Like Neil, that was the first time I ever won a US Open doubles. Like he was a world champion. Like I had been very, very fortunate to actually get him as my partner. It was a real learning experience. Mike Mike was this, number 2 in the world at court tennis, fantastic hands, right? But he was not a rackets player. To win a US Open with Mike, like that was sort of special, because that was sort of like, oh, like how good am I? How good can I play? Can I play so that a guy whose second sport is rackets, we win an Open. Jonathan, I mean, that's, the first world doubles championship I ever won. He was, I mean, one of the cleanest ball strikers that I've ever seen, that I've ever been able to share the court with. Just a lot of fun to partner. Like, we enjoyed ourselves when we were on court. It was special because it was my first doubles world championship. It was his first world championship. Like, that was a pretty incredible feeling in 2016. And then, like you and I playing was more sort of a proud as a coach. It was winning the British Open. British Open is the biggest doubles tournament. All the Brits are there, which, in the past has always been the strongest tournament.
Yeah.
For you and I to go over and play on, their home court, which is not an easy court to play on at Queen's. And to win that first British Open with an American was I was very, very proud of that. Considering that you carried me in the semifinals, in the 7th game against Rich and Tom. You came in, you were right, you couldn't walk,
Yep.
and yet you still, I mean, you played your part perfectly, and that, like, as a coach, is all I could ask for.
I got out of the way very effectively and got a couple serves in at important times rather than faulting. So I did enough. That's been I think the key to any double success is picking a good partner and doing just enough.
Yeah.
Proudest non-racket sporting accomplishment.
Non-racket sport?
Non-rackets. No, non-rackets.
Non-racket.
Such as squash or, not like breaking 100 in golf.
Yeah.
Which questionable.
One day I might be able to achieve.
Yeah.
Court tennis, I managed to win the 2010 US Open. It was in New York on the home court, home crowd. Beat Camden in the semifinals, who was gearing up for a world championship challenge, eliminator, sorry. And then beat Bryn Sayers in the final. Like, I started playing court tennis in 2006, and so that was, again, like, that was a really special moment. That was a really special moment. Like, Mike Gooding had, put a lot of time and effort into my court tennis game. Barney had moved up to New York after Andy Fowler left. It was just, that was a big win. That was a big win in my sporting career. And then what other one? Yeah, and that's
a pretty good one. Some would argue.
Yeah, that's a big one. I'd say probably the biggest.
So we've talked. I mean, your name, I think, in the rackets world is synonymous with being successful. But what would you say is, I guess, your lowest or toughest moment as a player in rackets, if there is one that you can recall?
I had a couple. Big ones, probably US Open. US Open in 17 in Philadelphia?
It was either 17 or 18 in Philly. Yeah.
It was 17 or 18. I I'd won my US Open singles semifinal. Duncliffe and Tom were playing their second semifinal singles. There was accident on court. Tom got hit in the mouth with a racket. Ended up going and having some stitches, a couple of teeth, got sort of knocked out and then placed back in. And it was like a highly emotional time around the club, figuring out like what's the rules, what's going on. We'd never been in this sort of situation before. And I sort of let it get to me, and we were playing the doubles semifinal like later on that day, and I was an absolute mess. Like no focus, nothing. And I think Jonathan and I were playing
Coiney, right?
Coiney and
Duncliffe.
It may have been Duncliffe, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was the worst match I've played, I'd say. Like and Jonathan tried to get me to focus, and I was just like, nah, can't do it. Like that was a tough tournament. That was a tough tournament position to be in.
I would imagine that Philly, you have some good memories as well, having won the World Championship against Hoppy there in fine form. I think in that match, having watched it, you've talked about your World Championship singles matches and saying, you can't expect yourself to come out and win super convincingly and play your absolute best. But that was a match, having watched you play, where I think you kind of like pieced the match together successfully. Didn't necessarily have like your best game on the day, but managed the match really well, and grew into the match. And by the end we're flying. But that court, I think, suits you really well. And having watched you play just about on every court in North America, would you say that Philly is your favorite court? New York, where would you say is your favorite place to play and favorite court to play on?
New York is hands down my favorite court. Like I know the court. I know that court as well as anyone knows any court. Like I know what the ball is going to do. I know where it's going to go. I know the speed. The balls can change, but that, like, to me, it's because of the amount that I've played. It's my baseline. It's my default. Like I know exactly where the ball is going to end up. I know what a good bounce is. The ball doesn't kick out into my body, right? But again, like if I had been based anywhere else, like that court would be my baseline. So New York is definitely my favorite court. Philly is the Philadelphia court is a close second. Like, whether it doesn't matter what court you play on, like you go to Philadelphia and it's a beautiful court. It's fast. It's very true. Like the ball does sort of what you're expecting it to. And I mean, personally for me, like I love a fast court. Fast court is great. You've got less time to think. You've got less time to sort of swing. It's more controlled. Like it played to my game.
I guess on the flip side of that, what would be your least favorite court to play on?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Like, I don't particularly like playing on Queens. I don't think it's a good court. I don't think it sort of encourages like good rackets to be played. because again, like you could serve well, at least in the past, like I haven't played there much recently. But like the balls are now a little bit different. But like growing up playing it, I mean, even when I was at school, playing at Queens was a different game of rackets. Bigger emphasis on serving, not so much like the aspects of the game which I focus, like Briars was coaching at Cheltenham, or I was playing in New York, of sort of like rallying, of controlling the ball. But that being said, like I've played on it enough that I don't hate it. It's just another challenge, something to adjust to. There were a couple.
That court doesn't seem like it takes your version of the serve as well as a New York or a Philly. I think that the technique that you use is definitely different than the British guys who are kind of coming over that ball and coming down the back of it. Whereas like the sort of that lower sidearm serve tends to kind of fly or foul cut or whatever. You have to get it just right for it to work. And then obviously the floor being slightly different surface than the sidewalls. I think, you're really good at reading the court in New York, but certainly at Queens, it's not the same kind of bounce as you get in New York. Let's see what else we got. I came up with this one. I had sent you a few of the questions, so James got to cheat a little bit, but this was not one that I sent you. Who is your dream doubles foursome? You could pick a dream doubles foursome, one match.
Got to go with my current partner. Be rude not to have you in there, Peter. Just because I've trained you to carry me, so
right.
You as my partner, I'd say Christian Ports is one of the cleanest strikers that I've come up against. I've played a few matches against him, played a doubles world championship, played some fun US Open singles matches with him. And when he plays well, like it's enjoyable because it's exciting rackets. So I would say I'd have him on there. And then I'd probably throw out, again, not very well known, but I would say Christopher Stout, my youngest brother. He's got a mean backhand. He's got a really, really. I remember watching it when he was at school, and and Briars would say it was just like, you've never hit a ball as cleanly as he has. So I'd like to see him, playing a little bit more just to see how good it is. See if it's as good as your backhand.
Right now, probably a lot better.
But that would, that would be a fun doubles match.
Cool. Let's see here. Here's a good question for you. I think, we've spoken in the past about, the future of the game of rackets and the professional versus the amateur game and whatever issues there are around that for you and for the rest of the people that play. And there have been a lot of talks in the fairly recent past about that. For you, what is the most realistic yet ideal future of the game of rackets look like, as as it relates to the professional game versus the amateur game?
Probably not the most popular opinion, but I'd take a chapter out of squash doubles here in North America. The SDA, which is Squash Doubles Association, they don't have a distinction between amateur and professional. So if you're a member of the tour, which you pay a yearly fee to be a part of. If you play in a tournament, you get a check.
Mhm.
And I personally would love to see that in Rackets. I'd love it to be there's, $15,000 prize money. Every single person in the main draw is getting a cut of that. It's an expensive game. Like, it's not played. It's not played in a ton of places. It's not like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go down to the second club in New York City and play against their players. Like, for us, it's a train ride to Philadelphia. If we want to play against some of the other top players in the world, it's a 7-hour flight to London.
Yeah.
It's expensive. It's an expensive game. And so I think, if you had the ability to sort of people to make some money, I think it would make a big difference, especially for these top young guys that are coming out of playing 5 days a week at high school. They're now going to college. They're paying rent, they're paying school fees, or they've just finished university, right? And they're looking for a job, they're starting a new job, they're bottom rung, trying to build themselves up. I think it's an expensive game. And I think if there's a way to offset some of those costs, it would benefit us greatly. Yeah.
I guess in that same vein, you can plead the fifth here. But it seemed, at the time that you decided to retire from singles, there wasn't just a playing related decision to quit. It was some of that stuff. What would you say were the major contributing factors for your deciding to retire from singles?
Not going to give you the full answer. It was, I mean, one of the biggest decisions was I've got, at the time I was like, I've got maybe 4 or 5 like competitive years left. And I don't want to waste them. I'd gotten to a point where I'd won everything in rackets, singles world championship, doubles world championship. I was still in pretty good shape, still pretty young at the time, so it was a sort of natural time to be like, let's focus on squash doubles, which, became a big interest. And again, it was less headaches. Again, there are certain things which, there are differences between amateurs and pros, and where we think, the game should go, where it's going. And I sort of just got to a point where I was like, you know what, like I want to take advantage of the years that I have instead of continuing to sort of not push myself. Towards the end of my singles career, like I wasn't very motivated. I wasn't training properly. I wasn't trying to get better. Like you mentioned my match with my world championship with Hopton. I think, like, looking back, that was probably around the time when I was playing my best rackets. Like,
Yeah.
I've definitely gained a lot of experience and I know things now that I didn't then, but between like level of experience, physical abilities, this and that, like that was me sort of,
Yeah, you're at that sort of apex.
yeah. And so, it had been a little bit of a decline since, and I just, I was showing up to tournaments and, I was nonplussed about like whether or not like I played well, like, am I actually trying to improve? I wasn't, so I just wasn't really happy with, like my image, like that to me was not James Stout. And so I didn't want to do it anymore. And I was like, okay, like let's move on. And so, it ended up being a good time.
Yeah, and the doubles squash thing has certainly worked out. I think we're still striving for number one. That's got to be the goal, right?
It would be nice. Yeah.
And then I think, if I don't ask this question, I think someone will slap me across the face in the Rackets community. I have you're a captive audience, and we were just talking about singles. Is there any way in the world that we'll ever see James Stout playing a competitive singles rackets match again in your lifetime? Do we think that's a possibility?
Probably not. Probably not. Like, would I get out and play like an exhibition? Yes. Would I consider going up to Tuxedo this coming weekend, playing the pro singles? Like,
just to make sure that Connor Medlow doesn't win.
Not even Connor, it's Barney.
Yeah, can't let Barney's name get on that trophy again, right?
No, probably not. Like, again, I think at this point, again, I'm not gonna play to a level that I think is where I should be. And personally, like, I also don't really want to, like, these young guys. I say young guys. Tom is young. Tom is very fit. He's playing better and better. His game has improved, significantly since we played our world championship.
Yep.
You've got Ben Colston. You've got Freddie Bristow, Magnus, who just won the amateur doubles, right? Like, these young guys, like, each generation is better and better, right? Like, you should be growing from the guys that came before you. And they're able to do things just like with their body, their movements that I wasn't able to do. And so I'd probably get a little bit too competitive playing these guys. I'd probably try to push too hard.
Yeah.
And as you know, as a slightly elder gentleman,
yes, sir.
It hurts. Like, it really hurts. And so, like, there's not much to be gained by me playing another competitive singles match.
Well, there is a lot to be gained from you playing another competitive doubles match.
That's right.
At least for one of us on this Zoom, hopefully. I guess the last question is a non-James Stout Rackets related question. You mentioned Ben Costin and Tom Billings, and they've got a world championship coming up. You watched, I'm sure, some of their British Open match, and you know both of those players pretty well. Can we get a prediction out of you as to what the result of that match is going to be?
It's a tough one, right? Because British Open, great result for Ben, beating Tom. Tom's definitely on the mend from his injury, which postponed the first World Championship. It's a tough one. It really is.
It is.
And again, there's something to be said for an actual World Championship and like playing on that stage. I think if it's your first time playing in a World Championship, you're not quite ready for it. Like, the emotions run high. I think it can drain you more than you think it will. That being said, like, I've had the opportunity to hit more with Ben over the past sort of like year. Been very fortunate. He's come over to New York and spent some time with both of us. So I would have to back my fellow pro and say Ben Colston. And if we're looking at a game, are we looking for a game prediction as well?
Yeah, why not? Go wild.
Why not? I'd say 7-2.
7-2. Wow.
Yeah.
That would be a hell of a win for Ben Costin. Tom Billings, the gauntlet has been thrown down. The challenge has been made. Let's see what you're made of, buddy. I think that's pretty much it. I can't think of any more questions unless you have anything that you have a burning desire to discuss this moment. It's been just over an hour. So I'll turn it over to you for a a second if you'd like. Otherwise, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And it's been really interesting and nice to hear from you.
I would like to say, massive thank you, Peter. I was closely watching all of your podcasts during COVID. It was a ray of sunshine, in dark times. It was great to, as a student of the game myself, just like you, I loved hearing all the other perspectives from the former world champs, from Ben, from Ed. It was something that I sort of was looking forward to. Like, oh, when's the next one coming out? Who is it? What does James Mail have to say? What does Neil Smith have to say? I really appreciated you taking the time and effort to interview those guys. John Pren, Howard Angus, there is so much knowledge that those guys bring to this game. And I think I think everyone in the community benefits from you having put this together. And then lastly, just, there's no one that I've come across that tries harder on the Rackets court, or is at least as persistent as you. And it's been a fun few years, playing together, hitting with you, watching you grow, not only as a friend, but as a player. And I think, you asked me what my greatest achievement, on court, off court, other racket sports. I think my greatest achievement, what I take home with me every single night is the ability to coach guys like you and the other members. It's the best part of my job, is seeing you guys improve, and thinking I had something to do with it. So thank you very much. Keep taking lessons. And
we have to make sure that we pay for the Stout mortgage one way or another, put Ollie through school, pay for the cat food. I think I see Tina hovering in the background, make sure that she gets everything she needs, keep the lights on, etc. So James Stout, thank you very much. Be seeing you not tomorrow because my knees hurt from playing today, but maybe the next day after that.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter.
Sayonara.
Cheers.